Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Confessions. I'm the guy who learned the hard way that silence isn't always the same thing as weakness. And last night, my wife found out just how loud I can be when I've had enough. It happened in the middle of someone else's speech. Everyone was gathered around the host, raising glasses, clapping politely. But my eyes weren't on the man talking. They were locked on her, Harper, standing halfway across the room, holding her champagne like she was trying not to drop it, her shoulders stiff, her smile paper-thin. I could tell the exact second it hit her that I knew. She didn't try to play it off. No fake laugh, no casual wave. Instead, she set her glass down without a sip, murmured something to the man beside her, and slipped toward the door. My gut told me to follow, but my feet didn't move. Not yet. I wanted her to think she'd gotten away clean. What she didn't know was that I'd been watching her all night, and not just with my own eyes. My phone was in my pocket, still recording from when I'd accidentally left it on a side table earlier. I'd already caught enough. The whispers in the corner, the way her fingers trailed over his sleeve when no one was looking, and that quick kiss, half hidden behind the buffet table, that would replay in my head every time I closed my eyes. The second the door closed behind her, I knew she thought I'd stay quiet, maybe go home and pretend none of this happened. But if she thought the husband who never made a fuss was about to keep protecting her from the consequences she'd written for herself, well, she was so wrong. The moment Harper disappeared through the door, the room seemed to shrink. The clinking of glasses, the polite laughter, the murmur of the speech, it all turned into background static. My pulse was louder than everything else. I took one slow breath, slid my phone out of my pocket, and stopped the recording. My thumb hovered over the play button, but I didn't need to listen. I knew exactly what I'd captured, and hearing it again right then would have been like pressing a bruise just to feel it hurt. I told myself to leave quietly, but my legs carried me faster than I expected. Down the narrow staircase from the rooftop, the music faded behind me, replaced by the muffled hum of the city. My palms were sweating. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was hollow. That's the only word for it. Like someone had scooped out everything solid inside me and left nothing but the echo of what used to be there. Halfway down, I caught sight of her through the glass doors at the building's entrance. She was outside, leaning against a black car, the man beside her holding her hand like it belonged there. They were talking quickly, their bodies angled in that way people do when they want to shut out the rest of the world. I slowed my steps, staying in the shadows. She looked over her shoulder once. Not toward me, but toward the street, as if she was making sure no one she knew was watching. The irony almost made me laugh. She'd just been at a party full of her colleagues, but the thought of being seen out here, like this, still made her cautious. I don't know what possessed me, but instead of confronting her, I turned and walked out a side exit, circling around the block. My car was parked far enough away that I could take the long way, think through what I was going to do. Every part of me wanted to storm up, demand answers, maybe even humiliate her the way she'd humiliated me. But I've never been that man. I've always been the one who lets things slide, tells myself it's not worth the drama. That's why she probably thought she could get away with this. But here's the thing. I'd been quiet for years. I'd swallowed every snide remark, every unexplained late night, every "you're overreacting" dismissal. And now, walking toward my car under the flicker of a broken street lamp, I realized I was done swallowing. I didn't know exactly how or when I'd do it, but Harper was going to learn that the man she thought was safe to betray wasn't as harmless as she believed. By the time I reached my car, she and her companion were gone. I sat there for a minute in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, staring at the empty space where their car had been. That's when the message buzzed through on my phone. From her. 3 words, no punctuation, no explanation. "We need to talk." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like replying right away. When I pulled into our driveway, the place looked exactly the same as it always did, which almost felt like an insult. The porch light glowed warmly, the curtains were half drawn, and the faint hum of the refrigerator leaked through the kitchen window I'd forgotten to close earlier. It was like the house hadn't gotten the memo that everything inside my marriage had just cracked. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, half expecting to find her there already, pacing the living room, ready to spin some story about misunderstandings and innocent conversations. But the air was still. The only movement came from the slow, lazy sweep of the ceiling fan above me. I didn't bother turning on the main lights. Instead, I let the soft amber from the hallway lamp guide me through the silence. I went straight to the dining table, dropping my phone, keys, and wallet onto the wood with a dull clatter. I should have been too drained to think straight, but something about the quiet made my mind sharper, like my instincts had finally woken up after years of sleeping through little warning signs. For the first time in a long while, I started noticing things. The faint whiff of a perfume I didn't recognize lingering in the air. Not hers, not mine. A small folded piece of paper sticking out from under a placemat, which, when I pulled it free, turned out to be a receipt from a wine bar downtown. A wine bar we'd never been to together. The date at the top was last Thursday, the night she told me she was working late to catch up on reports. I moved into the bedroom, my shoes muffled by the carpet. Her side of the dresser was messier than usual. One of her jewelry boxes sat open, a necklace half spilling out. It wasn't the one I'd given her. It was new, delicate, and expensive looking. And next to it, tucked under a silk scarf, I found a small envelope with handwriting I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened as I slid the card out. No name, just 3 words. Can't wait again. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the card in my hand, feeling my heartbeat in my fingertips. This wasn't just a one-night slip at some party. This had been going on. She'd planned it. They'd planned it. All those nights she came home with stories about client dinners, all the last-minute meetings. I'd been the idiot who took her at her word. I heard a car door outside and froze. Footsteps on the driveway, then the creak of the porch steps. My first instinct was to confront her the second she walked in. Throw the card on the table, demand the truth. But then, for reasons I can't even explain, I stayed seated in the dark. If she thought I was asleep, I'd get to see what she did when she believed no one was watching. The front door opened slowly, and her heels clicked softly against the hardwood. There was no greeting, no calling my name. Instead, I heard the faint rustle of a bag being set down, followed by the creak of the floorboards as she made her way to the bedroom. I held my breath. When she stepped in and saw me sitting there in the dim light, she froze like a deer in headlights. And before I could say a single word, she blurted out the sentence that told me everything I needed to know. I can explain, but you're not going to like it. She stood there in the doorway, still clutching her purse, her breathing shallow like she'd just run a mile. I could tell she'd rehearsed whatever was about to come out of her mouth. The way her eyes darted to the floor, then to my face, then back to the floor again. I leaned back slightly, my elbows resting on my knees, and just stared at her. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't tell her to start talking. I let the silence stretch long enough for her to feel its weight, long enough for her to fidget with the strap of her purse like it was going to save her. Finally, she let out a nervous laugh, the kind that's supposed to lighten the mood but only makes it worse. "It's not what it looked like at the party," she said, her voice a little too bright. I didn't move. "That man? He's just someone from work. We've been collaborating on a project for weeks now. He wanted to discuss something in private, but it wasn't inappropriate." Her hands made vague little gestures, as if she could wave away the image of her hand resting on his arm, the whispered conversation in the corner, the champagne glass abandoned as she slipped out the door. I reached over to the nightstand, picked up the small card I'd found earlier, and held it out toward her. "And this?" I asked, my voice thinner than I intended. She froze, her pupils tightening. She didn't take the card, didn't even glance at it for more than a second before looking back at me with a flicker of annoyance that she tried to mask with a sigh. "It's not from him," she said too quickly, like a child caught lying about stealing cookies. "It's from a client. A thank you note." She laughed again, but the sound cracked in the middle. You know how people can be overly familiar sometimes. I wanted to believe her. God help me. A part of me actually wanted to let it slide, to file it away as another strange, uncomfortable moment that we'd never talk about again. But my chest felt tight, my head buzzing with every memory of her late nights. Every time she'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. Every phone call she'd taken in another room. "You think I don't notice?" I said quietly. "You think I'm too, what? Too mild? Too passive to put the pieces together?" Her eyes narrowed. "You're being paranoid," she said. And there it was, the shift, the irritation, the subtle twist that made me the problem. "You always do this. You blow little things out of proportion. This is why I don't tell you everything. Because you can't handle it." That hit harder than I expected. My hands tightened into fists in my lap, my voice wobbling when I finally answered. "You're right," I said. "I haven't been handling it. I've been swallowing it. Every lie, every excuse, every time you've made me feel like I'm imagining things. But not anymore." She rolled her eyes like I was a teenager throwing a tantrum. "What are you going to do, Ethan? Leave? You won't. You never do." I didn't answer her. Not because she was right, but because for the first time in years I wasn't entirely sure she was. And that uncertainty scared her more than anything I could have said in that moment. I saw it, a flicker of doubt in her face before she looked away. And as she turned toward the bathroom, muttering something under her breath, I realized I didn't need the perfect comeback or some dramatic confrontation. All I needed was patience, and the right moment to show her that she'd underestimated me for the last time. She shut the bathroom door with a little more force than necessary, and the sound of running water filled the space between us. I stayed on the edge of the bed, the card still in my hand, turning it over and over with my thumb. I didn't know exactly what my plan was yet, but I knew I needed to stop reacting and start thinking. I'd spent too many years letting her dictate the narrative, turning every suspicion into a character flaw of mine. If I confronted her now with nothing but accusations, she'd twist it again. No, this time I'd let her feel the ground shift under her feet slowly, without even realizing it until it was too late. When she finally came out, her hair damp and face bare, she barely glanced at me before slipping into bed and turning on her side. I could smell the faint, unfamiliar cologne clinging to her sweater, and it made my jaw ache from clenching it. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing even out as she pretended to sleep. My mind was already cataloging the steps. Her phone habits, her sudden schedule changes, the friends who always seemed to cover for her. I'd been passive for so long that she'd stopped even trying to hide it well. That arrogance was going to make this easier. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. I made coffee, asked if she wanted toast, even kissed her on the cheek before she left. She gave me that puzzled look people give when the script they expected doesn't get followed. But she didn't question it. That was good. I needed her to believe I'd moved on, because the less guarded she felt, the more she'd slip. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I got to work. I started with the receipt I'd found. A quick search of the wine bar's website told me exactly what kind of place it was. Small, expensive, dimly lit, with private booths and a no photography policy for guest discretion. That told me more than I wanted to know. I called the bar, pretending to be confirming a reservation for a follow-up meeting. The hostess was polite but distracted, and when I mentioned Harper's name casually in conversation, she didn't hesitate to say, "Oh yes, I remember her. She was here with a gentleman last week. Do you want the same table?" I hung up before my voice betrayed me. The confirmation was like a punch to the chest, but it was also the first solid piece of proof that couldn't be spun into a misunderstanding. I didn't plan to confront her with it right away, not when I could let her believe she still had the upper hand. Instead, I started a small folder on my laptop, password protected, where I stored every receipt, every timestamp, every odd phone record I could get my hands on. That evening, she came home smiling, telling me about a team lunch she'd had that ran late. I smiled back, asked how the food was, and even offered to do the dishes so she could relax. I watched her carefully as she chatted about work, her guard completely down. She didn't notice the tiny slip when she said we instead of I while talking about her lunch. She didn't notice me noticing. What she also didn't notice was the small tracking device I'd already tucked into the lining of her gym bag earlier that day. Something she carried with her everywhere. even on late nights. I didn't plan on using it right away, but I wanted to be ready for when the right opportunity came. That night, as she fell asleep beside me, I realized the strangest thing. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm. Too calm. Because now, for the first time in this whole mess, I wasn't wondering what she'd do next. I was deciding what I'd do to her first. It took 3 days before the tracking device paid off. I didn't check it constantly at first. I didn't want to get obsessed and make a mistake. But on Thursday evening, right after she left the house with her gym bag slung over her shoulder, I sat at my desk and opened the app. At first, it looked like she was going exactly where she said she would. The pin on the map hovered near the fitness center she'd been loyal to for years. But 20 minutes later, it started moving again, drifting away from the gym and deeper into the downtown area. I leaned forward, watching the little blue glide down a street lined with restaurants and boutique hotels. Then it stopped, right in front of a hotel I knew well, one of those upscale places with marble floors, discreet staff, and a lobby bar that always smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. My stomach turned, but my mind stayed clear. I grabbed my jacket, keys, and the folder from my laptop, then slipped out without even locking the front door. The drive there was surreal. Streetlights blurred past. My fingers tapped against the steering wheel, and I kept telling myself I wasn't actually going inside. I just wanted to see. I convinced myself to stop a block away, maybe even turn around. But when I finally parked across the street from the hotel, my pulse already pounding, I knew I wasn't going anywhere until I had more than a GPS signal. I spotted her almost immediately. She was in the lobby, her coat draped over one arm, laughing at something the sandy-haired man from the rooftop party had said. He reached out, brushed a piece of hair from her face like it was the most natural thing in the world. They didn't rush. They didn't act like people sneaking around. They looked comfortable, practiced. I stayed in the shadow of a bus shelter, watching them until they disappeared into the elevator. My mind was racing, not with rage but with calculation. Following them upstairs would have been the dramatic move, but dramatic moves end quickly. I wanted longevity, proof that wouldn't crumble under excuses. So instead, I walked into the hotel like I belonged there, heading straight for the bar. I ordered a drink I had no intention of touching and positioned myself so I could see the elevator from a distance. 27 minutes later, they came back down. She was smiling in that soft, satisfied way I hadn't seen in years, the way people smile when they've gotten exactly what they wanted. He was talking, leaning in close, and she rested her hand lightly on his chest before they stepped out onto the street together. They didn't notice me. I was just another face in a quiet corner. I waited until they were gone before leaving. On the way home, I pulled over twice just to catch my breath. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, but I kept thinking about one thing. She had no idea I was there. No idea I'd been tracking her. That ignorance was the one advantage I had, and I wasn't going to waste it. When I finally got home, the house was still empty. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled out my folder, and wrote down the timestamps, the location, the details of what I'd seen. It felt clinical, almost like I was preparing a report for someone else. And in a way, I was not for her, for me. Because when the time came, I wanted to lay it all out so cleanly that even she couldn't pretend it was anything but the truth. That night, she came back just before midnight. She kissed my forehead like nothing had happened and told me the gym had been packed, but she still got a good workout in. I smiled, told her I was glad she was taking care of herself, and pretended to go back to my book. Inside, I was already working out exactly how I'd use the information she didn't even know she'd given me. By the next morning, the pieces of my plan were already clicking into place, though I made sure to keep every movement looking like routine. Harper thought she'd gotten away with another late night at the gym, and I intended to let her believe that for a while longer. People get careless when they think you've stopped paying attention. My first step was to quietly find out who in her life would be most embarrassed to see her lies unravel. Not for my sake, but for hers. I wasn't interested in screaming matches or throwing things. I wanted a collapse so thorough she couldn't rebuild the story afterward. I started with her friend circle. Over breakfast, I asked about a mutual acquaintance she hadn't mentioned in months. pretending it was small talk. She perked up, chatting easily, and in the process let slip that she'd be seeing several people this coming Saturday at a networking brunch her firm was hosting. It was the kind of event where reputations mattered, not a place where someone could afford to be caught off guard. My mind started ticking through possibilities, the shape of the trap forming without me even realizing it. That afternoon, while she was out running errands, I sifted through the digital breadcrumbs she'd left on our shared laptop over the years. She wasn't reckless enough to keep incriminating photos or messages lying around, but people forget how much their patterns give them away. Her calendar had multiple client meetings listed over the past 3 months, all in the same downtown area, all conveniently timed for late evenings. I compared them against the tracking data and found an exact overlap on several nights. That was the kind of precision I needed: dates, times, and locations that fit together too neatly to be coincidence. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time, her former colleague, Jenna, who'd left the firm under mysterious circumstances. I kept my tone casual, as if I was just checking in, and within minutes Jenna was telling me stories about Harper's team-building habits, even back then. It wasn't solid evidence, but it was context, and context has a way of making the truth look even uglier when the moment comes. By the time Harper came home, I had already booked myself a seat at that Saturday brunch, under the guise of supporting her professional life. She was surprised at first but smiled, clearly thinking it was an olive branch after our tension earlier in the week. I kept my own smile steady, offering to even drive us there so she could relax. She didn't notice the small, flat envelope I'd slipped into my briefcase, the one holding printed copies of the receipts, the GPS logs, and the photo I'd quietly snapped of her and the man in the hotel lobby. That night, as we sat together on the couch watching a movie I barely registered, I kept glancing at her out of the corner of my eye. She was relaxed, scrolling through her phone, occasionally laughing at something on the screen. She had no idea that the walls were slowly closing in, no idea that every word she'd say at that brunch would feel perfectly normal to her, until I decided to speak. When we finally went to bed, I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless lying next to her. I didn't feel small or ignored. I felt like the one holding all the cards, and I was in no rush to play them, because the anticipation was becoming its own kind of satisfaction. Saturday came, and I drove us to the brunch like I was just another doting husband tagging along to support his wife's career. Harper was dressed immaculately, wearing the same green dress from the rooftop party, the one I now couldn't unsee in my mind, and greeting her colleagues with that polished, practiced smile she always used in public. We were seated at a long table near the center of the room, with the clink of champagne glasses and the low hum of polite conversation all around us. She was in her element, laughing, leaning in to chat with the people she wanted to impress. I waited. I laughed when she laughed. I complimented her stories when she glanced at me for validation. And when dessert was served and the table was fully engaged, I slipped my hand into my briefcase, pulled out the envelope, and placed it on the table in front of her. She glanced at it, puzzled, before sliding it open. Her eyes moved quickly over the GPS logs, the hotel timestamp, the wine bar receipt, and the photo. Her smile faltered, the light in her voice dimmed, and she looked at me like she was trying to will me into silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I simply said, "I think you've left out some important details about your recent professional activities." The table went quiet. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her hands trembling as she gathered the papers back into the envelope. There was no outburst, no denial, just a heavy, suffocating pause. The rest of the brunch moved on without her. She excused herself early, claiming she wasn't feeling well, and left alone. I stayed, making polite conversation, even laughing genuinely for the first time in a while. Felt light, like the weight I'd been carrying for months had finally been set down. When I got home later, she was gone. No note, no suitcase, nothing of hers out of place. Just an emptiness that didn't feel like loss. Over the next few weeks, papers were filed, arrangements were made, and I realized something that startled me. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was free. And the best part? I had never once screamed, begged, or threatened. I had ended it on my terms, in my way, and left her to face the truth she'd been hiding behind for so long. So now I'm here, telling you all on Reddit Confessions, not because I need sympathy, but because sometimes the quietest moves are the loudest ones in the end. I walked away with my dignity intact, my life back, and a future that's mine again. What about you? Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you until the moment you surprised them? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if you enjoyed the story, make sure you're subscribed to Reddit Confessions for more real stories just like this one.